In a grand music academy located in the center of the city, the sound of piano notes often filled the long marble halls. Every day, students dressed in neat uniforms walked past the shining glass doors, carrying their music sheets and dreams of fame. The academy was known for training the most talented young musicians. But behind all the glamour and music, there was someone most people never noticed, a quiet janitor named Daniel. Daniel was an older man with kind eyes and a calm face. He wore the same faded blue uniform every day and carried his mop and bucket from one corner of the academy to another. His shoes were worn out, his hands rough from years of work, but he always greeted everyone with a polite smile. Most students barely noticed him. To them, he was just the man who cleaned the floors, emptied the bins, and kept the place tidy. Yet there was something peaceful about him, a quietness that carried wisdom, though no one cared enough to see it. Every evening, when the students left and the lights dimmed, Daniel stayed behind to finish his work. The echo of the piano slowly faded, leaving only the sound of his broom brushing the floor. Sometimes he paused near the grand piano in the main hall, a large black instrument that gleamed under the soft light. He would stop for a few seconds, look at it with a faraway expression, then continue cleaning as if nothing had happened. One of the students who often stayed late was Clara. She was the daughter of a very wealthy businessman and one of the most promising pianists at the academy. Her father had donated large sums of money to the school, and everyone treated her with special care. She walked with confidence, dressed elegantly even during practice, and played the piano with sharp skill. But behind her talent was a pride that made her look down on those she thought were beneath her. Clara believed that success came only to those with class, money, and the right connections. When Daniel passed by during her practice hours, she barely glanced at him. Sometimes she even asked him to clean somewhere else, afraid that his presence might distract her. Daniel never complained. He would simply nod, smile gently, and move to another room. One evening, Clara was preparing for an important recital that would take place in front of many famous musicians. She was practicing a difficult piece, a long and emotional composition that required not just skill but feeling. She sat at the grand piano, her fingers moving quickly over the keys, but the melody felt stiff and empty. She frowned, playing the same passage again and again, getting more frustrated with each mistake. Daniel was quietly mopping the floor near the entrance. The sound of her frustration filled the room. She hit a few wrong notes, sighed loudly, and stopped playing. Then she looked at him. "Can you please go somewhere else?" she said sharply. "I can't concentrate with all that noise." Daniel looked up and nodded politely. "Of course, miss," he replied softly. He gathered his bucket and mop and slowly walked to the far corner of the hall. But as he moved away, his eyes drifted toward the piano again. For a moment, something flickered in them, a memory perhaps, or a longing. Clara didn't notice. She was too focused on her struggle. The notes on her sheet music seemed to mock her. She wanted perfection, but no matter how hard she pressed the keys, something was missing. The emotion didn't reach the music. It sounded mechanical, lifeless. Daniel, from across the room, quietly hummed the tune she was playing. His voice was barely audible, just a whisper that floated in the air. He hummed the melody slowly with warmth, and somehow the tune sounded more alive than Clara's playing. But she didn't hear it, or maybe she chose not to. When the clock struck 9, Clara closed the piano lid with a sigh and packed her things. As she walked past Daniel, she muttered, "Some people don't understand how hard this is." Daniel smiled gently and said, "Music can be hard, yes, but it also listens to the heart more than the hands." Clara frowned. She didn't understand what he meant. She thought it was just something an old man said to sound wise. Without replying, she left the room. That night, after everyone was gone, Daniel walked back to the piano. He stood there for a long time, staring at it. His reflection appeared on the shiny black surface, a reflection of someone who once belonged to that world. Slowly, he sat down on the bench. His fingers hovered above the keys. They trembled slightly, as if unsure whether they had permission to touch something so beautiful again. Then softly, he pressed a key. A single note echoed through the empty hall. He pressed another and then another until a gentle melody began to form. It was the same piece Clara had been practicing, but this time it sounded different. The tune carried emotion, sadness, longing, and hope. Every note spoke of stories untold, of dreams lost and remembered. The music filled the entire hall, wrapping the walls in warmth. If someone had walked in just then, they would never have believed that the man playing was the janitor. Daniel played until his eyes grew moist. When the last note faded, he smiled faintly and whispered, "Still the same, old friend." He carefully closed the piano lid, wiped the bench with his cloth, and returned to his cart. No one saw him. No one knew the music that lived inside him. The next morning, Clara returned for another round of practice. When she sat at the piano, she noticed something unusual. The keys felt slightly warm, as if they had been played not long ago. She thought maybe the teacher had used it before her, so she ignored it. But when she began to play, she felt a strange emotion rise in her chest. The notes seemed to echo differently, as if the piano had remembered something. She shook her head and focused on her sheet music again. Days passed, and Daniel continued his quiet routine. Every morning he greeted the teachers with a polite nod, carried out the trash, polished the floors, and kept the academy spotless. Sometimes, when no one was around, he would stand outside the music rooms, listening. He loved hearing the young students play. It reminded him of another time, a time when music wasn't just something to clean around, but something he lived for. One afternoon, Clara and a few of her classmates were talking near the piano. They were laughing about a rumor that someone had heard music late at night. One of the boys joked, "Maybe the ghost of Beethoven visits this place." They all laughed. Daniel was dusting the windows nearby. He smiled quietly but said nothing. Clara noticed him and turned to her friends. "Maybe it was him," she said, half joking. "Our janitor must be having fun pretending to play when we're gone." Her friends laughed loudly. Daniel just kept cleaning, pretending not to hear. But inside, something in his heart tightened, not from anger, but from sadness. He wasn't embarrassed, just quietly reminded of how easily people judged others by what they saw. That evening, as Clara practiced again, she struggled with the same passage. The notes refused to sound right. She sighed and leaned back, frustrated. Daniel entered the hall to clean as usual. He noticed her expression and said softly, "Maybe try closing your eyes when you play." Clara looked at him, slightly irritated. "Excuse me?" Daniel smiled gently. "Sometimes the eyes see too much and the heart too little. Music listens better when it comes from here," he said, placing his hand over his chest. Clara didn't respond. She thought it was strange advice from someone who mopped floors. But something in his tone, calm, sincere, almost fatherly, made her pause. That night, when she returned home, Clara couldn't stop thinking about what the janitor had said. She sat by her piano at home and tried it. She closed her eyes and played the piece. To her surprise, it did sound different. Softer, warmer, more alive. She couldn't explain why, but the words of the janitor echoed in her mind. At the academy, Daniel continued his quiet life, always in the background, always unseen. But the grand piano in the hall seemed to know his secret. Every time he passed by, the light from the window reflected softly off its polished surface like a silent greeting. And though no one knew it yet, the day was coming when that piano and the man everyone overlooked would change everything. In those silent nights when everyone had gone, Daniel would still play, only for himself and the stars. He didn't need applause. He didn't need recognition. The music was enough. It reminded him of who he was and who he still could be. The next few days at the music academy passed quietly, but something had started to change. Clara began to notice things she never cared about before. She noticed how the janitor, Daniel, always worked carefully, never rushing, never complaining. He would polish the piano keys gently, as if they were made of glass. She found herself watching him sometimes without meaning to. There was something peaceful about the way he moved, as if he was always in rhythm with the world around him. Clara had another practice session that week. Her recital was getting closer, and she still couldn't play her piece the way she wanted. No matter how hard she tried, it didn't sound right. Her teacher had told her, "You play with skill, but not with feeling." Those words bothered her. She didn't understand what they meant. How could she make her music feel something? That afternoon, the large practice hall was empty, except for her and Daniel, who was cleaning the windows quietly in the back. Clara sat at the piano, playing the same section over and over again. Her fingers moved fast, hitting all the right notes, but it still didn't sound alive. She slammed her hands on the keys in frustration. The loud sound echoed across the room. Daniel looked up. He didn't say anything at first, but after a few moments he spoke softly. "You seem upset, miss?" Clara sighed. "This piece won't sound right no matter what I do. I practice for hours every day, and it still doesn't feel like music." Daniel nodded slowly, as if he understood exactly what she meant. "Sometimes music doesn't come from how long we practice," he said gently. "It comes from what we feel when we play." Clara frowned. "I've heard that before. But how can I feel something just because I want to?" Daniel smiled faintly. "You don't force it. You remember something important to you, someone or some moment, and let that memory guide your hands. When you play from memory, not from notes, the music becomes yours." Clara looked at him, curious now. "How do you know that?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, then smiled. "I've cleaned many music rooms in my life. You learn things by listening." He turned away before she could ask more. That night, Clara tried what he said. She thought about her mother, who used to sit beside her when she was little, listening to her first piano lessons. Her mother had passed away years ago, and Clara had buried that part of her life under busy schedules and fancy competitions. When she thought of her mother again, a wave of warmth and sadness filled her heart. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. For the first time, the notes flowed differently, soft, tender, emotional. The music finally sounded like a story. The next day, she practiced with new energy. Her classmates noticed the change too. One of them said, "You sound better today." "What happened?" Clara just shrugged. She didn't mention Daniel. She wasn't sure why, but she felt like keeping it to herself. Later that afternoon, Clara stayed back again to practice alone. Daniel came into the hall, sweeping the corners quietly. She stopped playing and said, "I tried what you said." Daniel paused and looked at her. "And?" "It worked," she admitted softly. It actually worked. A small smile appeared on his face. "I'm glad to hear that, miss." Clara tilted her head. "You talk about music like you know it really well. Are you sure you're just a janitor?" Daniel chuckled lightly. "I suppose I've spent enough time around music to understand a few things." Clara smiled back, but before she could say anything else, one of her classmates, a boy named Andrew, entered the hall with two friends. They were laughing and talking loudly. When they saw Clara and Daniel talking, Andrew grinned. "Clara, what are you doing chatting with the janitor?" he teased. "Getting cleaning tips?" The others laughed. Clara's face turned red. "No, I was just—" she began, but Andrew interrupted, walking toward the piano. "Hey, old man," he said to Daniel. "Do you even know what this is? That's a grand piano. Costs more than your salary for 10 years. Better not touch it. You might scratch it." Daniel didn't reply. He simply smiled politely like he always did. Clara felt embarrassed, not for herself, but for the way her classmates were acting. She wanted to say something, but before she could, Andrew continued mocking. "Actually, let's have some fun. Hey, janitor, you ever tried playing one of these? Let's hear your masterpiece." His friends laughed loudly. Clara frowned. "That's enough, Andrew," she said quietly. But Andrew ignored her. He turned to Daniel again. "Come on, play something, unless you don't even know how." Daniel's eyes met Clara's. She saw something in them. Not anger, not pride, just calmness. Then he looked back at Andrew and said softly, "If that's what you wish, young man." The laughter stopped for a moment. The boys hadn't expected him to agree. Clara watched as Daniel slowly walked toward the piano. He wiped his hands on his uniform, then sat down carefully, as though the instrument was something sacred. He rested his hands above the keys and took a deep breath. The room went silent. Then Daniel began to play. The first few notes were soft and gentle, almost hesitant. But within seconds, the melody grew stronger, more powerful. The air changed. The music filled the hall, wrapping everyone in its warmth. His fingers moved with perfect grace, flowing across the keys like water. It was the same piece Clara had been struggling with, but he played it as if it were alive. Every note carried emotion, joy, sorrow, and peace all at once. Clara stood frozen. Her heart raced as she listened. The music was perfect, but it wasn't just the perfection that shocked her. It was the feeling behind it. It was full of soul, something she had been searching for but couldn't find. Andrew and his friends stared silently, their earlier laughter gone. They looked at each other, then back at the man they had just mocked. None of them spoke. When Daniel finally stopped playing, the last note lingered in the air for a long moment before fading away. He lifted his hands from the keys and smiled, quietly, almost shyly, as if nothing special had happened. Clara was the first to speak. "That was incredible," she whispered. Her voice trembled slightly. How did you learn to play like that?" Daniel looked at her with gentle eyes. "I used to spend a lot of time with pianos," he said softly. "They were once part of my life." Andrew finally found his voice. "You're joking, right? You actually know how to play like that?" His tone had changed from mockery to disbelief. Daniel simply nodded. "I used to teach music once." The room fell silent again. No one knew what to say. Clara looked at him with wide eyes. "You were a teacher?" "Yes," Daniel said, his voice calm but filled with a trace of sadness. "A long time ago, before life took a different turn." Clara felt a lump in her throat. She suddenly realized how wrong she and everyone else had been to look down on him. This man, the one everyone ignored, carried more music in his heart than anyone in that academy. Andrew muttered something under his breath and walked out of the room, his friends following him in silence. Clara stayed. She didn't know what to say, but she wanted to understand more. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" she asked softly. "Why do you work as a janitor if you can play like that?" Daniel smiled, but his eyes looked distant. "Sometimes life doesn't follow the music we expect, but that doesn't mean we stop playing." Clara didn't speak. She just nodded slowly, her mind full of questions. She realized that the melody he played still echoed in her chest. It was beautiful and painful at the same time. That night, as she walked home, she couldn't stop thinking about him, the janitor who played better than any musician she knew. His words kept repeating in her mind. Sometimes life doesn't follow the music we expect. She didn't know what his story was, but she knew one thing. She wanted to learn from him. In the quiet of her room, she sat at her own piano and played the same piece again, this time remembering Daniel's expression when he played. She closed her eyes, and for the first time she understood what it meant to play from the heart. From that day, Clara's view of the world began to change. She no longer saw Daniel as just the janitor. She saw him as something else, a mystery, a teacher, and maybe even the key to unlocking the true meaning of her music. The next morning at the academy, Clara arrived earlier than usual. She felt restless all night, thinking about what she had witnessed. The janitor playing the piano like a true master. She had never seen anyone play with that much heart. The sound of his music still echoed in her mind, soft but powerful, like a secret she couldn't let go of. When she entered the main hall, it was empty. The piano stood in its usual place, shining under the morning light. For the first time, Clara looked at it differently. It no longer seemed like an object of pride or wealth. It felt like something alive, something that could connect people beyond status. She sat down at the piano and placed her fingers gently on the keys. She remembered the way Daniel had played. So calm, so connected. She tried to play the same piece again, not with competition in her mind, but with feeling. The sound that came out was softer, more natural. It wasn't perfect, but it felt honest. For the first time, she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just wanted to feel the music. As she played, she heard a soft sound behind her, the faint rolling of a mop bucket. Daniel had arrived for his morning shift. He stopped near the entrance and listened quietly for a few seconds. When Clara finished, she turned around and smiled a little. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning, miss," Daniel replied kindly. "That sounded different today." Clara blushed slightly. "I'm trying to learn from what you said." Daniel nodded approvingly. "I can hear it. Music listens to the heart first, then the fingers." She hesitated for a moment. then asked quietly, "You really used to be a teacher, didn't you?" He paused, then gave a small smile. "Yes, a long time ago." Clara's curiosity grew. "What happened?" Daniel's eyes softened. "Life happened," he said gently. "Sometimes, even when we love something deeply, circumstances take it away for a while." Clara didn't push for more. She could sense that it was painful for him to talk about. Instead, she said, Would you teach me? Just a little? Not officially. Just help me understand music the way you do." Daniel looked surprised, but then his face lit up with a humble smile. "If you wish, miss, I can try." That was how it began. Every afternoon after the other students had gone, Clara would stay behind for an extra hour. Daniel would quietly sit beside the piano while she played. He never scolded her or corrected her harshly. Instead, he would say things that made her think differently. When she hit a wrong note, he'd smile and say, "Even wrong notes have stories to tell. Listen to them." When her playing sounded too mechanical, he'd tell her, "Don't play to be perfect. Play to be true." Clara found herself changing. The girl who once played to impress now played to express. The girl who once looked down on others began to see beauty in humility. Every word Daniel said carried weight, not just about music, but about life. She realized that he wasn't just teaching her piano, he was teaching her understanding. One evening, as the sun painted the hall in gold, Daniel asked her to close her sheet music. "No notes today," he said. "Play something from your heart." "Anything." Clara hesitated. "But I don't know what to play." "Then start with silence," Daniel said. "Silence is where music begins." She took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. Slowly, she began to play. The melody that came out was soft, uncertain at first, then gradually clearer. She didn't even know what she was playing. It just flowed naturally. Daniel closed his eyes and listened, smiling slightly. When she finished, the room was quiet except for the faint hum of the ceiling lights. "That," Daniel said softly, "is real music." Clara looked at him and smiled. It felt different, like it wasn't just me playing, but something else guiding me. "That's because music is alive," Daniel replied. "It doesn't belong to us. We just give it a voice." The next day, Clara arrived early again, eager for their session. But when she entered the hall, Daniel wasn't there. She waited for an hour, but he didn't come. Later, one of the staff told her he had taken the day off due to illness. She felt strangely worried, though she didn't understand why. That evening, she played the piano alone and realized how much she had started depending on his quiet presence. Without him, the room felt empty. The following week, Daniel returned looking a bit tired but still wearing his warm smile. When Clara saw him, she felt an unexpected relief. "You're back," she said, trying not to sound too eager. "I am," Daniel said softly. "A piano isn't the only thing that needs care. Sometimes the body does too." Clara smiled. "You scared me. I thought maybe you had left." Daniel chuckled lightly. "I'm not easy to get rid of." Their lessons continued, but now Clara paid more attention to Daniel himself. She noticed the slight stiffness in his hands, the way he sometimes paused to catch his breath. She realized he wasn't as strong as he looked. One evening, after a lesson, she asked quietly, "Why do you still work here? Someone with your talent could teach again." Daniel looked at the piano and said softly, "Not everyone gets a second chance in the same way. Life gave me music again, even if only through listening to others play. That's enough for me." Clara didn't agree. She believed he deserved more recognition, more respect. But she didn't say it out loud. Instead, she silently promised herself that one day, she would make sure others saw his talent too. Word about the janitor who played piano began to spread quietly around the academy. Some students didn't believe it, but others whispered about the day he played in front of Clara and her friends. A few even started treating him differently, offering him polite nods or small smiles. Daniel, however, remained the same. He didn't care for attention. He just did his work, and helped Clara when she asked. One afternoon, the head of the academy walked into the hall while Clara and Daniel were in the middle of a session. Clara froze, unsure what to do. The headmaster, a stern man with sharp glasses, looked at them both. "Miss Clara, what is the janitor doing here during your private practice time?" he asked firmly. Clara stood up quickly. He's been helping me understand my piece better," she said nervously. The headmaster raised an eyebrow. "Helping you? He's not qualified for that. He should stick to his duties." Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but Clara interrupted. "Please, sir. He's actually helped me improve more than any lesson I've had. I'm not joking." The headmaster looked at her, then at Daniel. His expression softened slightly. "Be that as it may, Miss Clara, we have rules. The janitor should not be involved in lessons. I hope this will not happen again." With that, he walked out of the room. Clara felt a wave of guilt. Daniel looked calm, though there was a trace of sadness in his eyes. "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "I didn't mean to get you in trouble." Daniel smiled gently. "Don't worry, miss. Music always finds its way, even if people don't understand it." For the next few days, Clara practiced alone again, but she still saw Daniel around, cleaning the halls, sweeping near the classrooms, always smiling when their eyes met. She missed his quiet advice and the comfort of his presence. One evening, as she played in the hall, she noticed him standing by the door listening silently. She smiled and said, "Are you just going to stand there, or will you tell me what I did wrong?" He chuckled and walked in. "You didn't do anything wrong. You played beautifully." Clara looked at him seriously. "I want you to be at my recital." "You have to come." Daniel hesitated. "Oh, I don't think I belong there." "You do," she insisted. "You're the reason I can play like this now." He smiled a bit shyly. "We'll see." That night, Clara practiced harder than ever. She wanted to make him proud. She wanted the whole world to hear the music he had taught her to feel. And deep down, Daniel felt something too. A quiet joy he hadn't felt in years. For the first time since his life had changed, he wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was a teacher again, even if only for one student. The air inside the music room felt heavy that afternoon. The group of students had gathered again, laughing and chatting as they always did. The grand piano stood proudly in the center, shining under the warm light that poured in through the tall windows. Among them, the rich girl sat with her arms crossed, a faint smirk on her face. The janitor quietly entered to do his usual cleaning. He carried his old broom and a small dustpan, careful not to disturb anyone. Yet, as always, his presence didn't go unnoticed by the students. They had made it a habit to joke about him. Sometimes they laughed at his old uniform, other times at his slow walk. He never argued. He simply smiled politely and continued working. Today, though, something was different. One of the students whispered something to the others, and soon all eyes turned toward the janitor. The rich girl gave a playful grin, tapping the piano keys lightly. "Hey, old man," one of her friends called out. "You seem to like music so much. Why don't you show us what you can do?" The others burst into laughter. The janitor stopped sweeping and looked up. His kind eyes showed no anger, only calm curiosity. "Me?" he asked softly, as if surprised by the suggestion. "Yes, you," the girl replied, amused. "You're always humming while cleaning. If you think you can do better, play something for us." Her tone carried a mix of arrogance and mockery, but there was also a spark of curiosity she tried to hide. The janitor placed his broom aside. He didn't rush to the piano. Instead, he wiped his hands on his cloth and slowly walked toward it. The students exchanged glances, whispering under their breath. They expected him to touch the keys clumsily, maybe play a few wrong notes so they could laugh again. The rich girl leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with confidence. She thought this would be amusing, but when the janitor sat down, something changed in the air. He didn't look nervous. His fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, steady and relaxed. His eyes softened as if he was remembering something far away. Then, without saying a word, he began to play. The first notes were gentle, like the sound of a calm breeze brushing through leaves. The students stopped laughing almost instantly. The melody grew stronger, smoother, and filled the entire room with warmth. The janitor's hands moved with such ease and grace that no one could look away. Every note seemed to tell a story of joy, loss, hope, and dreams long forgotten. The rich girl's smile slowly faded. Her expression shifted from amusement to disbelief. She had never heard someone play like that. The sound wasn't just skillful. It was alive. The music carried emotion, something that her own performances often lacked. The janitor's face remained calm, his eyes closed as if he was lost in the music, feeling every sound deeply. Minutes passed, but to everyone in that room, time stood still. The melody danced from soft whispers to powerful waves of sound that filled every corner of the room. When the last note lingered in the air, the janitor lifted his hands and sat still for a moment. The silence that followed was heavy and emotional. No one dared to speak. The rich girl was the first to find her voice. How did you do that?" she asked quietly. There was no mockery in her tone now, only pure awe. The janitor smiled faintly. "It's just a song," he said softly, standing up. He reached for his broom again as if nothing had happened. But to the students, everything had changed. They couldn't look at him the same way anymore. The rich girl stood up slowly and walked toward the piano. "You played the same piece I've been practicing," she said, her voice shaking slightly. But it sounded different. The janitor paused and looked at her kindly. "Music is not only about notes," he said. "It's about what you feel when you play." His words struck something deep inside her. She thought of all the times she had played to impress others, to earn applause, to show off her talent, to prove she was the best. But she had never played to express her heart. Watching the janitor just now made her realize that music had a soul she had never touched. Her friends remained quiet, unsure how to react. Some looked guilty for laughing earlier. Others simply stared at the janitor as if seeing him for the first time. The rich girl's pride had been replaced by a quiet respect. "Will you teach me?" she suddenly asked. The question surprised everyone in the room, including the janitor himself. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I'm just a janitor," he said humbly. But she shook her head firmly. "No, you're more than that. You understand the music in a way I never have." Her voice carried sincerity that hadn't been there before. The janitor didn't give an answer right away. He looked at the piano again, then at the young faces watching him. "If you truly want to learn," he said after a moment, "you must first forget about showing off. You must learn to listen, not just with your ears, but with your heart." The girl nodded slowly. His words felt like lessons not only about music, but about life. The other students left quietly, their earlier laughter gone, replaced by silence and reflection. The janitor went back to his work, sweeping the same floor as always, but the room felt different now. The students' respect had replaced their mockery. They had seen something they would never forget. Later that evening, when everyone had gone, the rich girl stayed behind. She sat at the piano again, trying to play the same piece. Her fingers stumbled over the keys at first. The sound didn't carry the same feeling as when the janitor played. But she kept trying, remembering his words. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about the recital or her father's approval. She was just trying to feel the music. The janitor passed by quietly and watched her from a distance. A faint smile appeared on his face. He could tell she was beginning to understand. Without a word, he left the room, letting her find her own rhythm. The sound of her hesitant notes followed him down the hallway. That night, the janitor walked home through the quiet streets. The city lights reflected on the wet pavement, and he hummed softly as he walked. There was a calm happiness in his heart. He hadn't played in front of anyone for years, not since life had taken him away from the stage he once knew. But today, for a moment, the music had come alive again. At the same time, the rich girl sat alone by the piano, her fingers still resting on the keys. The sound of his melody echoed in her mind. She had never felt so moved, so humbled. For the first time, she realized that real beauty didn't come from wealth or status. It came from something deeper, something honest. And she silently promised herself that she would learn to play not just with skill, but with heart. The music room, once filled with noise and laughter, now held a peaceful silence. The piano, still warm from the janitor's touch, stood as a reminder of that unexpected moment, when a humble man with a broom had taught a group of privileged students the true meaning of art, respect, and humanity. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the academy, filling the hallways with a golden glow. Everything looked the same. The polished floors, the shining piano, the rows of chairs. But for the students, especially the rich girl, nothing felt the same anymore. Since that day when the janitor played the piano, something inside her had changed. Her usual confidence had softened into quiet determination. She no longer came to the academy to show off. She came to learn. Every morning she arrived early. The janitor would already be there, cleaning the classrooms, moving quietly from one corner to another. He never spoke much, but his presence brought a strange comfort. Sometimes she greeted him with a shy smile, and he would nod back, eyes kind but distant. She wanted to ask him again to teach her, but something in his humble silence made her wait. She didn't want to rush him. Days passed, and she practiced more than ever. The same melody he had played still echoed in her mind. She tried to play it again and again, but it never sounded the same. There was always something missing, a feeling she couldn't quite capture. No matter how much she practiced, she couldn't make the notes come alive like he did. One afternoon, as she was playing, the janitor entered the room to mop the floor. He paused for a moment, listening to her struggle with a section of the piece. Her fingers moved fast, her technique sharp, but the sound lacked warmth. After a moment, she stopped and sighed in frustration. "It's never right," she murmured. The janitor leaned on his mop and smiled. "You're trying too hard," he said softly. She turned to him, surprised. "What do you mean?" He set the mop aside and walked closer to the piano. "You're chasing perfection," he said. "But perfection is not what music asks for. Music asks for truth." She frowned slightly. "Truth?" she repeated. "Yes," he said, nodding. "When you play, don't think about the notes. Think about what they mean. Each note carries a piece of feeling, joy, sadness, longing. You must let yourself feel them, not just play them." His words lingered in her mind. She sat quietly for a moment, then turned back to the piano. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play again. This time she didn't focus on getting everything perfect. She just let her hands move. The sound that filled the room was softer, more human. There were still mistakes, but the melody carried warmth, something new. When she finished, she looked up at him, uncertain. "Better," he said simply with a small smile. She smiled back, feeling a sense of pride she hadn't felt before. It wasn't the kind that came from applause or praise, but from understanding. From that day on, their quiet lessons began. He never formally agreed to teach her, yet every afternoon he stayed a little longer in the music room. Sometimes he gave her small advice, a way to feel the rhythm, to slow down, to breathe between notes. Other times he simply listened while she played. There was no judgment, only patience. The girl learned that music wasn't about showing off. It was about connection, and to the sound, to herself, to the people listening. She started helping other students too, no longer competing but encouraging them. Her friends noticed the change. They teased her at first, saying she had become too serious. But soon they saw something different in her eyes, a quiet strength that came from humility. One evening, after everyone had left, the girl found the janitor sitting near the window, watching the rain. She walked over and sat beside him. "You play like someone who's lived 100 lives," she said softly. "Why did you stop?" He smiled faintly, eyes distant. "Life has a way of changing our paths," he said. "I used to teach once. Music was my whole world. But when my wife got sick, I had to let it go. After she passed, I never touched the piano again. It hurt too much." The girl listened quietly, her heart heavy. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "Don't be. She used to love hearing me play. I think she'd be happy to know that music still finds a way to live, even through someone else." They sat in silence, the sound of rain tapping softly on the windows. The girl realized that the janitor's music wasn't born from skill or fame. It came from love, loss, and years of quiet strength. That was what made his playing so powerful. It was real. From then on, she practiced not to impress, but to express. Each time she touched the piano, she thought about stories, her own and others. She imagined what the janitor must have felt all those years ago, playing for someone he loved. Her music grew deeper, richer. Even the teachers began to notice. "You've changed," one of them said. "Your playing has soul now." She smiled, knowing exactly why. As weeks turned into months, the academy prepared for the annual recital, the biggest event of the year. The girl was chosen to perform the final piece, the one that would close the show. Everyone expected her to shine as always, but this time she felt nervous. It wasn't about fear of failure. It was about wanting to honor what she had learned. One afternoon, she found the janitor cleaning the hall where the recital would take place. The stage lights were being tested and the grand piano was being polished to perfection. She walked up to him and said, "Will you come to the recital?" He smiled kindly. "I'm not sure they'd let a janitor sit in the front row," he joked. She shook her head. "Then I'll make sure they do." Her tone was firm and he couldn't help but laugh softly. The night of the recital arrived. The hall was filled with families, teachers, and guests dressed in elegant clothes. The girl stood backstage, heart pounding. She peeked through the curtain and saw him, the janitor, standing quietly near the back wall. He wasn't seated with the guests, but he was there, broom in hand, watching with a small smile. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage. The lights were bright and the crowd fell silent. She sat at the piano, her fingers trembling slightly. For a moment, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In her mind, she saw the janitor's gentle smile, heard his calm voice saying, "Play with your heart." The first note echoed softly through the hall. Then another and another. The melody rose, full of feeling and warmth. She didn't think about perfection anymore. She thought about everything she had learned, about patience, about loss, about kindness. Each note carried a piece of her journey. The audience listened, completely silent, as her music filled the room. When she finished, there was a pause, then thunderous applause. People stood to their feet, cheering. The girl bowed, but her eyes searched the room until she found him. The janitor was still standing at the back, clapping quietly with tears in his eyes. She smiled through her own tears. That moment meant more to her than any trophy or praise. After the recital, the girl found him backstage. "You came," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. He nodded. "I wouldn't miss it," he said softly. "You played beautifully. Your music had truth." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "It's because of you," she said. "You taught me what music really is." He shook his head gently. "No," he said. "You taught yourself. I only reminded you where to look." They stood there for a long moment, both smiling. The noise of celebration echoed in the distance, but neither of them paid attention. In that quiet corner, a teacher and a student, though not by title, shared a silent understanding. That night, as the janitor locked the empty music hall, he walked past the piano one last time. He placed his hand gently on the keys, not to play, but just to feel the smooth surface. A soft smile crossed his face. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man who had lost his place. He felt like someone who had helped music find its way back into the world. Outside, the girl waited for her car. When she saw him leave the building, she waved goodbye with both hands. He waved back, the street light reflecting softly off his eyes. Neither of them needed to say anything. They both knew that what had happened between them would last forever, not as a story of talent or class, but as a quiet truth that music, kindness, and respect can connect two worlds that were never meant to meet and make them one. The days after the recital were quiet at the academy. The applause had faded, the lights were gone, but the memory of that performance stayed alive in everyone's heart. Students spoke about it for days, telling others how the proud rich girl had played with such emotion that even the teachers were moved to tears. No one knew the full story behind that transformation, but everyone sensed something special had happened. The girl came back to the academy the next morning, feeling lighter than she ever had before. The music room, once just a place for practice, now felt sacred. She walked inside and touched the piano keys softly, smiling. The janitor was there, sweeping as usual, humming quietly to himself. When he saw her, he nodded gently. "You did well," he said. "I'm proud of you." She smiled shyly. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied. "You helped me find something I didn't even know I was missing." He laughed softly. "You always had it," he said. "You just needed to stop listening to the noise and start listening to yourself." His words were simple, but they carried deep meaning. She understood what he meant. Not just about music, but about life. As days turned into weeks, their quiet friendship continued. She practiced every day, but now it wasn't about winning competitions or impressing people. It was about expression, honesty, and connection. The janitor didn't teach her in the traditional way. There were no lessons, no formal instructions. Instead, he guided her through conversation, and by simply being there, watching, listening, and reminding her that feeling mattered more than perfection. One afternoon, while she was practicing, a teacher walked in and stopped to listen. The teacher, known for being strict, stood silently for several minutes. When she finished, he said, "That was beautiful. You've grown, truly." She smiled and thanked him, but inside, she knew the real teacher wasn't standing in front of her. He was the man quietly sweeping in the corner. The teacher turned to the janitor and said politely, "You seem to spend a lot of time here. Thank you for keeping the room so clean." The janitor nodded with a humble smile. The girl wanted to tell the teacher who he really was, that this man wasn't just a janitor, but a once great pianist who had changed her life. But she stopped herself. She realized he didn't need recognition. His peace came from knowing he had shared his gift once more. Later that evening, as the sun set behind the academy, the girl and the janitor sat outside near the garden. The air was cool, and the sound of birds returning to their nests filled the silence. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think being great meant being the best, but now I think it means making someone feel something." The janitor nodded, looking at the horizon. "That's the truth," he said. "Music is a language that speaks without words. When people feel something from what you play, that's when you've truly spoken." They sat there for a long while, not needing to say more. The connection between them didn't need constant word. It was something deeper, built through understanding and respect. Months passed, and life at the academy went on. The girl became one of the most admired students, not because of her background or skill, but because of her humility and sincerity. She helped others who struggled, often repeating the janitor's words, "Don't chase perfection. Chase truth." The other students began to notice the janitor, too. They greeted him kindly, no longer seeing him as invisible. Some even stayed back to talk with him, asking about music and life. He never talked about his past, but his quiet wisdom made an impression on everyone. One rainy day, the head of the academy announced that they were planning a special event, a tribute concert to celebrate teachers and mentors. Every student was asked to dedicate their performance to someone who had guided them. The girl knew immediately who hers would be for. When the night of the event arrived, the hall was filled with people once again. The girl walked onto the stage with calm confidence. The same piano waited under the warm lights. She looked out into the audience and saw him, the janitor, standing quietly near the back as always. Their eyes met and she smiled. She sat down and took a deep breath. "This performance," she said softly into the microphone, "is for the person who taught me that music is not about perfection or pride, but about honesty and heart. He may not stand on this stage, but his lessons live in every note I play." Then she began. The melody she played was not from a famous composer. It was something new, something she had written herself. It was gentle, emotional, and filled with the warmth of gratitude. The sound moved through the hall like sunlight breaking through clouds. People closed their eyes, swaying gently, lost in the feeling. The janitor stood still, his broom in hand, eyes glistening. He recognized bits of his own influence in her music. The pauses, the soft phrasing, the emotional depth. But what made him proudest was that she had found her own voice. When she finished, the applause was deafening. The audience rose to their feet. She stood and bowed, but once again her eyes searched only for him. He gave her a small nod, the kind that said everything words couldn't. After the concert, she rushed backstage, but he was already gone. She looked for him everywhere, in the hallways, the music room, even the garden. But there was no sign of him. The next morning she arrived early, hoping to find him at work, but his cleaning cart was gone. Another worker said he had resigned quietly without saying goodbye. Her heart sank. She felt an emptiness she hadn't expected. There were no goodbyes, no last words, just the quiet absence of someone who had changed her life. On the piano, she found a small folded note. It wasn't signed, but she knew it was from him. It read, "Keep playing with your heart. That's all I ever wanted you to do. Remember, music doesn't end, it only changes hands." Tears welled in her eyes as she held the note close. She sat at the piano and began to play, letting the music fill the empty room. Each note felt like a farewell, but also a promise to keep his lessons alive. Years later, the girl became a professional pianist known for her emotional performances. Audiences around the world admired her not only for her talent, but for the depth in her music. In interviews, when asked about her inspiration, she always smiled and said, "A teacher who never called himself one." She returned to the academy often, sometimes sitting at the same piano where it all began. She would close her eyes, imagine the sound of a broom brushing the floor, and smile. The memory of that humble man stayed with her always. On one of those visits, she found a young student struggling with the piano, frustrated and ready to give up. She knelt beside him and said gently, "Don't try to be perfect. Try to be honest. Feel what you play." The boy looked at her curiously, then tried again. The sound was small but warm. She smiled, recognizing the beginning of a beautiful journey. And so the janitor's lessons lived on, passed from one soul to another, quietly shaping hearts through music. The man who once swept floors had left behind something far greater than fame or fortune. He had left a legacy of truth, kindness, and the reminder that greatness can come from the most unexpected places. The piano stood there still, shining softly under the light, holding stories in its keys, stories of humility, respect, and the power of genuine human connection. And every time someone played it with feeling, it was as if his spirit was there, listening, smiling, and saying, "Yes, that's it. Play with your heart."